to abide in charity and avoid mortal sin. It is therefore a truism that the leadership of the state, which is responsible for organizing society, will have a serious effect on the social atmosphere in which we all strive to work out our salvation. Post-Enlightenment governments such as ours and those of modern Europe, of course, view their role as one of the great watchdog, providing people with the greatest opportunity to do whatsoever they please, with few exceptions. In contrast to this is the vision of Engelbert Dollfuss, which is the Catholic vision. 70 years ago, he inaugurated in Austria a government conceived with those Catholic principles in mind. His purpose was to help men to live well and not simply to live, and not simply to help them to live well, but help them to live well that they might achieve heaven. Alongside Antonio Salazar of Portugal, Eamon de Valera of Ireland, and a few others we might mention, he is one of the towering figures of Catholicism of the last century, an exemplar of true and Christian statesmanship, the incarnation of all that was best in the Habsburg Empire, and as G.K. Chesterton wrote, a year after Dollfuss was assassinated, the representative of all that remains of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, what else is to be gained by considering Dollfuss and his career and achievement? I.e., what else will I attempt to cover in this brief space, although no promises? An appreciation for the tradition that gave birth to such a man, the historical tradition, the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburgs. The immediate predecessor of Dollfuss, Father Ignaz Seipel, who reigned as chancellor for a number of years and led the Christian Social Party in Austria. The philosophical tradition, German social Catholicism, which will involve us then in an acquaintance with the social doctrines of the church, the notion of corporatism, or what is in the English-speaking world is known as the guild system, and the Austrian version of distributism, if you will, which sees agriculture as the primary industry in any sane and functioning economy. The encyclicals, especially Quadragesimo Anno and Rerum Novarum, theologians and philosophers of the Catholic social doctrine, and we will be acquainted also with the role that Catholic social doctrine once played even in a modern Catholic government, such as Austria of the early 1930s. Finally, again, with sufficient time, I would mention something that I find personally very interesting, the abandonment, or at least the ignorance, of Catholic orthodox and integral social doctrine by the modern church and so-called modern scholars. And what I will not do in the talk is do much straight biography. By the grace of God, we had the ability to reprint a 1935 biography of Dollfuss by Father Johannes Messner, who was an advisor to Dollfuss in the Austrian government in the early 1930s, wrote a wonderful book on the Chancellor, a book that mostly gives you the Chancellor's own words that I will be sharing a few of with you today. I would encourage you, if the subject interests you, get it, read it, enjoy it, profit from it. The first 2 chapters give some biographical details of Dollfuss's life, where he came from, what kind of man he was, which I won't get into in great detail today. But again, that's available should you want to pursue this further. Now, the historical perspective is important. I will try to move through this quickly because I don't want to waste too much time on it. I'd rather give us the meat of Dollfuss's vision of government. But what shoes were there to fill when Engelbert Dollfuss was providentially placed in a position to come to power at the head of the Austrian state in May of 1932? What shoes did he fill? And the answer, of course, was given by Chesterton, the last representative on earth of the Holy Roman Empire. Not a juridical representative, because the empire was disestablished long before, but a spiritual and idealistic representative, one who incarnated all the ideals that that empire stood for in its best sense. And in the short term, the shoes that Dollfuss had to fill were those of Ignaz Seipel, his illustrious predecessor, and he, of course, had to deal with the period of severe crisis that Austria was facing during the 1920s and early 1930s. Now, Messner, one of Dollfuss's biographers, confirms this need for an appreciation of his background in the following words. It would be impossible to estimate justly what the 2 years of the Dollfuss chancellorship meant in the history of Austria and of Europe by considering merely what presents itself today as his work. It is necessary to know where Austria stood when he assumed the leadership. The dark and heavy clouds which obscured the horizon, the disruptive forces which were sapping the foundations of the state. One must look back and remember the endless difficulties, the constantly new